Max didn't eat his breakfast. Well, not exactly. He rushed over the second Lucy set the bowl down, inhaled a few bites, then walked away. 20 minutes later, he came back. Another few bites. An hour after that. He was standing in the kitchen again, meowing like breakfast had somehow become a distant childhood memory. Lucy laughed. Nice try. Except that afternoon, when she picked up the bowl, something looked off. The wet food had dried around the edges. The kibble had gone soft. And somehow, Max still seemed convinced he hadn't been fed enough. A few weeks later, during a routine veterinary visit, Lucy mentioned she fed both wet and dry food. The veterinarian nodded, then asked a question she wasn't expecting. How are you combining them? Not, which brands? Not, how much? Just, how? That question stayed with her. Because feeding both wet and dry food isn't automatically the perfect solution people often imagine. Done thoughtfully, it can work very well. Done without much planning, it can quietly create problems that don't seem connected to the food bowl at all. Weight gain, constant begging, food sitting out too long, even hydration that's not quite what owners think they're providing. And that's because your cat usually isn't responding to two different foods. They're responding to one entire feeding experience. Once you start looking at it that way, Lucy's confusing breakfast suddenly begins to make a lot more sense. 1. Your cat doesn't experience two foods. They experience one routine. Most owners think they're serving two different foods. Wet food, dry food. Two foods sharing one bowl. Your cat doesn't experience breakfast that way. To them, it's one familiar routine. The cupboard opens, the bowl comes out. The food appears. Before breakfast reaches the floor, many cats already know what's coming. Cats are excellent pattern learners. When meals happen the same way every day, they quickly learn what to expect. That's why many cats are already waiting before breakfast is ready. Your feeding routine teaches your cat as much as the food itself. Two owners can feed the exact same brands, yet create very different habits. One meal is picked up after eating. The other stays out for hours. Same food, different routine. That's why Lucy's veterinarian asked how she combined the foods, not simply what she fed, because the routine often matters just as much. And that brings us to the part most people think about first. Hydration. 2. Wet food does more than add water. If you've looked into cat nutrition, you've probably heard this advice. Wet food helps with hydration. That's true, but it's only part of the picture. Cats evolved eating prey that naturally provided much of the water they needed. That instinct hasn't changed. When a meaningful portion of a meal comes from wet food, your cat takes in water alongside nutrients, which may help support urinary health. But proportion matters. A small spoonful mixed into a large serving of kibble won't provide the same benefit as making wet food a genuine part of the meal. Lucy noticed something interesting after changing Max's routine. He wasn't suddenly drinking more. He simply seemed more satisfied after eating. Less pacing, less checking the kitchen. Hydration alone doesn't explain that. Because satisfaction depends on more than water. It also depends on how the meal fills your cat. 3. Feeling full isn't just about volume. Many owners assume hunger works like a fuel gauge. Food goes in, problem solved. Cats don't always work that way. Some meals simply keep them satisfied longer than others. That's one reason many owners notice their cats seem calmer after a balanced combination feeding routine. The goal isn't choosing wet food over dry food. It's making sure both work together as one daily feeding plan. That's what Lucy eventually realized. Max wasn't always begging because he needed another meal. Sometimes he was following the routine he'd learned. Eat, walk away, come back later. The bowl had quietly taught him that pattern. Leave a comment and let us know. What's one feeding habit your cat has trained you into following, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't? Because the next mistake Lucy discovered is probably the most common one of all, and it has surprisingly little to do with whether the food is wet or dry. 4. The biggest mistake isn't mixing them, it's counting them twice. Lucy thought she was serving one balanced breakfast. A scoop of kibble, half a pouch of wet food, mixed together. Done. She wasn't giving Max 2 meals, she was simply feeding both foods. Then her veterinarian asked a simple question. If the wet food wasn't there, would you serve the same amount of kibble? She would. And after adding the wet food, she paused. The same amount? That's when everything clicked. Because calories don't care where they come from. Wet food and dry food are part of the same daily energy budget. Combination feeding works best when both foods share that budget, not when each gets a full serving. The tricky part is that overfeeding rarely looks obvious. The bowl doesn't seem overflowing. The extra calories simply add up over time. Weeks become months. Then one day the scale has quietly changed. That's why many cats gain weight without their owners ever feeling like they're overfeeding. So if you're feeding wet and dry food together, think of them as one complete meal, not 2 meals sharing a bowl. If this is changing the way you see your cat's meals, click the button and join us. We spend a lot of time exploring the everyday behaviors that make much more sense once you see them from your cat's perspective. The next habit builds just as quietly. But this time, it isn't about calories. It's about time. 5. Your cat may be eating 2 different meals, hours apart. Let's go back to Max. Remember how he'd eat a little, walk away, then come back later? Lucy assumed he was simply a grazer. Sometimes he was. But the food was changing while it sat there. Dry kibble is designed to stay out much longer. Wet food isn't. As wet food sits at room temperature, it begins drying out. At the same time, nearby kibble absorbs moisture and loses its crunch. By lunchtime, the breakfast Max was eating wasn't quite the same meal Lucy had served. That's one reason many veterinarians recommend serving wet food as a meal rather than leaving it out for hours. If your cat doesn't finish it, picking up the leftovers after a reasonable amount of time usually keeps future meals fresher and more appealing. Lucy also noticed something else. Cold, wet food straight from the refrigerator often went untouched. Not because Max suddenly became picky, but because cats rely heavily on smell. Food that's slightly warmed releases more aroma, making it much more appealing to many cats. And that leads to the bigger question. If successful combination feeding isn't really about choosing wet food or dry food, what is the goal? 6. The goal isn't choosing the better food, it's building a better feeding routine. When Lucy brought Max back for his next checkup, she hadn't switched foods. She'd simply changed the routine. The wet food became a proper meal. The dry portion became smaller because it shared the day's calories. And wet food was no longer left sitting out for hours. Before long, something changed. Max still raced to breakfast. But afterward, he stopped returning to the bowl so often. Meals felt calmer. His weight stayed steady. Which brings us back to the beginning. Lucy thought the food was the problem. It wasn't. The routine was. Once she changed how she served the exact same foods, Max's eating habits changed too. That's the perspective many owners miss. The question usually isn't, is wet food better than dry food? It's, does my feeding routine match the way my cat actually eats? Because wet food and dry food aren't competing ideas. They work best when they're part of one thoughtful feeding plan. The food matters, but the routine around it often matters just as much. I'm gonna go. I just heard the unmistakable sound of my cat trying to convince everyone that an empty food bowl is a humanitarian crisis, so apparently I'm needed in the kitchen. FurEver.